Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SCA's 31st monthly Zoom presentation. My name is Brian Gallagher. I'm the Vice President of the Society for Commercial Archaeology. I'll be your host tonight. Welcome to all our guests, and particularly followers of Sign of the Times, Sign Collective, and Signs United. We're happy you took the time out of your autumn evening to watch an SCA presentation. I hope you enjoy the show. And for anyone watching the recording of this episode of the SCA's monthly presentations who is not a member of the SCA, we earnestly ask you to consider joining. Funding for the various activities of the SCA comes almost exclusively from our membership. Just visit our website at www.sca-roadside.org and follow the links. Now I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's presentation. During its heyday, Havana was a resort city rivaling Miami Beach or Las Vegas and an important commercial hub for the Americas. With the lack of commercial development following the Cuban Revolution, which effectively isolated the island from the United States in 1959, only the remnants of the exuberant and whimsical modern architecture that defined the city until then remain. These treasures, now often neglected or in ruins, are a fascinating glimpse back in time. Tonight, we will explore some of these fascinating places and trace their history through the eyes of photographer Josh Silber, with some commentary from locals who have worked to shine a light on these beautiful places and who are helping preserve and restore what remains. Josh is an SCA board member living in New York City. He has visited Cuba numerous times over the past and led tours highlighting the legacy of that pre-revolutionary time. Josh, please give us your presentation.
Okay, thanks so much, Brian. Appreciate the nice intro. So for those of us who love to marvel at surviving mid-century signage or architecture, you may have found yourself saying, like I have, that I wish I could go back in time. And a trip to Cuba is just about as close as you can get to going back in time. In 1958, at the end of 1958, Fidel Castro and his guerrilla army swept out of the hills of Cuba and into the cities and took over power. And the business and party capital of the Caribbean, which was Havana, was effectively closed off from the United States and commercially frozen in time at that point in time. It was frozen, it was forgotten, and it began to decay over those many years. Before Castro, there was a military dictator named Fulgencio Batista who was in charge, and he had the financial, military, logistical support of the United States government. And he was effectively run out of town on the very last day of 1958. But before that, while he was in charge, particularly throughout the 1940s and the 1950s, Havana developed its reputation as a playground for the elite. It was said at that time that Havana was then what Las Vegas has become. Drugs, rum, prostitution, gambling, organized crime, and everything that goes with it. Fancy cars, magnificent resorts, casinos, restaurants, and of course, what we love, the neon lights. And that's what we've come here to see. So I don't intend for this to be a political program. My aim here is to focus on commercial archaeology. That's right there in our name. That's the name of the organization, and that's what we like to see. So it's also not my intention for this to be like a travel photo album. I want you to understand the story of Havana and how this all has become effectively frozen in time. When I went to Cuba for the very first time, I knew that the things that I saw in Cuba would be of interest to my quote unquote sign friends, like USCA members and followers of Sign of the Times, Sign Collective, Signs United. And I just wanted to show you some of that stuff that I saw and let you hear from some of the people that are involved in trying to preserve these signs and preserve these structures and preserve these really interesting places that have been survivors for a lot of very unlikely reasons. And it's also so important that we try to save as much of it that remains as we can, now that we're starting to understand the historic preservation value of this stuff, to try to save as much of it as we can. But I want to give just a little bit of context of what we're seeing, and there's really a lot to see, so I'm going to try to move through this pretty quickly. Once the revolutionaries took hold in the first weeks of 1959, commerce was effectively frozen in Havana. There was no more fancy new American cars coming in. No more tourists. The mid-century modern resorts were effectively nationalized, which is a nice way of saying that all the privately owned businesses and property in Cuba was effectively taken over and confiscated by the government. The most famous example of that is the magnificent Havana Hilton Hotel. This hotel opened to tremendous fanfare in March of 1958. And the hotel, as you see here in this photo, was designed by Welton Beckett and Associates, the architecture firm that had previously designed the Beverly Hilton's signature property in Beverly Hills, California. They designed the Capitol Records building that we're also familiar with, and what I know is one of my all-time favorites, the Cinerama Dome in Hollywood. And of course, Conrad Hilton himself was there in Havana for the opening of this fantastic structure. And that's March of 1958, okay? This building had over 600 rooms, 30 floors. Why am I, there we go. My fast forward button is not working for my slides. Let me just figure that out. As you can see in this advertisement, this vintage advertisement, they called Havana the glamorous gay capital of Cuba. And the ad mentions the swimming pool, colorful cabanas, air conditioning throughout the whole building, which was a huge deal, and an exciting Trader Vic's restaurant. This property was designed to be a showplace, and it was up on a hill, the hill known as La Rampa, which was the grandest street in all of Vedado, and they considered Vedado the most stylish neighborhood in town. And it would be just a few months later when Castro and his revolutionaries took over the government. Batista fled, the corporate mobster friends all left, had to fend for themselves and left. And Castro actually took up residence in this Hilton and renamed it, as you can see on the top, the Havana Libre. And this hotel was located at the highest point in Havana, and it was visible throughout the entire city. And it was really the most prominent symbol of American culture and American influence in Cuba. So it, of course, became the perfect symbol of the revolution. And it remained a time capsule for decades. The legendary Tiki Bar, as I mentioned, Trader Vic's, is mentioned in the advertisement. That was down at street level on La Rampa, which was a very stylish street, and Castro renamed it the Polynesio, but the name was the only thing that changed. As you can see here, the decor remains original OG mid-century Trader Vic's decor all these years later. The entrance and those great tiki statues, there's the menu, which is updated, but it's the same. And the restaurant itself, all of that furnishing and all of the stuff that you see inside is original 1958 Trader Vic's, Hilton, great stuff. So the Havana Hilton itself is probably the most symbolic of the pre-revolutionary commercial artifacts in Cuba, but there's no better example of a time capsule, in my opinion, than the Havana Riviera Hotel, which is a perfectly preserved in all of its mid-century 1958, mid-century modern, whimsical style. This hotel was the dream of mobster Meyer Lansky. It was his idea that he would build a Vegas-style showplace right in the middle of Havana, but without all those laws and regulations and things that get in the way that they had in Las Vegas. And when this hotel opened in 1958, in December of 1957, it was the glitziest and largest hotel and casino outside of Havana. The sculptures outside, mosaic tiles, the building itself, just an absolutely gorgeous mid-century modern hotel. And here's the interior, which has been unchanged largely in all of these years. This photo on the left that you see with the Christmas tree was taken about 57 years after the hotel's very first Christmas, but it looks exactly like it did all those years ago. And then just 13 months after this hotel opened, Fidel Castro himself stood right in front of those double pink doors that you see here, which was the entrance to the Copa Cabaret Room. And he outlawed gambling in all of Cuba, nationalized ownership of the hotel. But yet, all these years later, somehow this magnificent interior survived. It's still operating as a hotel. I haven't stayed there myself, but I always do make it a point to go into this hotel and show everybody the lobby and walk around and see some of the absolutely magnificent furnishings and the style of this hotel, which is just absolutely fantastic. And the story of the Havana Riviera really does give a lot of context to the entirety of the story of Cuba, which was rapid commercial development in the 50s that absolutely froze after the revolution. Not a lot of new things were being built. Love those clocks behind the front desk. 3 clocks, one says Europe, one says Havana, one says Mexico. I always wonder if one of them was originally an American city, but I don't know. Some of the great interior terrazzo and furnishings from the hotel. Those statues were all original designs for the hotel. And of course, much like the Fontainebleau in Florida, in Miami Beach, Florida, a staircase to nowhere for all the elegant people to come parading down in their gowns. So Havana in the 1950s was growth, tourism, and in addition to all those new hotels that I was showing you, all of these old, great colonial era hotels were being modernized in a very American fashion, right? In New York City, we have the Plaza Hotel on Central Park, but in Havana, they've got the Hotel Plaza just off Parque Central, right in the middle of town. The Hotel Plaza's beautiful facade dates back to 1895. And that's one of the great things about Havana. You've got all these great styles blending into one. You've got colonial, mid-century modern, Art Deco, brutalist, and everything in between. But the 50s were really the big expansion period. And the mid-century neon sign that you see here was added when one of Meyer Lansky's associates actually took over and opened a casino inside of the Hotel Plaza. This picture on the left was from 2015. Both pictures actually from 2015. The sign that you see, the neon, beautiful yellow, had been dark for 50 years, but it had just been relit right then in 2015. And the relighting of these neon signs is really the story, one of the amazing stories that I want to tell you a little bit about tonight. And it's one of the reasons that kept me going back to Cuba so many times. In 2015, I was invited to travel down to Cuba with the Preservation Hall Jazz Band from New Orleans, who are absolutely amazing. And they were playing in the Havana Jazz Festival. It was one of the first major American jazz bands to play in the festival, to be invited to play there. And visiting Cuba had always been a dream of mine. I had gone to law school many years, almost 30 years ago, at the University of Miami and near Coral Gables, Florida, right on the edge of Little Havana in Miami, Florida, and always was intrigued by the Cuban culture and the thought of going to Cuba, but it was a difficult trip to make. So getting invited to go on that trip was great. And as I was planning for that trip, I had really 2 agendas. The music was my excuse to go, of course, but I was already mapping out in my mind some of the little neon treasures that I had seen in photographs over the years and was hoping to have some time to explore and find some things as I got down there. So back then in 2015, there was this guy that was organizing the trip. His name was Adolfo. As he's organizing this trip, I think he hated me. I'm a lawyer. I ask a lot of questions. I wanted a room upgrade. Is there a movie on the flight? I was always looking for answers and all kinds of things that he didn't really have a lot of answers for me. I could sense that he was annoyed, but I was very excited to be going on this trip. And you know, what can I tell you? I'm a pest. A few weeks before the trip, as we're getting ready to head down there, Preservation Hall Jazz Band came to New York City for a show, and they wanted to have a party after the show for all of us to get together, and everybody going on the trip could say hi to each other. And Ben Jaffe, who's the head of the band, tells me backstage, he starts talking to me about how excited he is that one of the things that we're doing on this trip is we're going to be relighting a historic neon sign on the opening night of the Havana Jazz Festival. And we're having a ceremony to relight the sign. And I was like, I couldn't believe it. What was he possibly talking about? It turns out, as he tells me, Adolfo, our tour organizer, is none other than a guy named Adolfo Nodal, who happens to be a legendary neon preservationist from Los Angeles. And he was working on bringing the Preservation Hall Jazz Band and a lot of other artistic things down to Havana. And he also was working with some tremendously talented neon artists down in Havana to get the sign relit and giving that as a gift to the city of Havana for our trip going down there. So my jazz world was intersecting with my neon world, and I was shocked. And the next day I called Adolfo on the phone, and we realized we had so many friends in common. We couldn't believe all the connections that we had and how I didn't put it together that he was the Adolfo that was setting up this trip. And of course, he said to me, you know, forget your itinerary on that trip. Meet me at Parque Central on your first morning. And my friend Allison and I broke off from our tour group that first morning. We had no idea what we were in for. But the world he introduced me to down there is something that I'd like to share with you a little bit tonight. So just taking a quick look at the Teatro Maya, which is right in the center of town, an absolutely magnificent Art Deco theater. And on the right, upper right, is the opening night of the Havana Jazz Festival. The theater was packed. It was very exciting. And you can see just the amazing design elements of the inside of that theater. Absolutely beautiful. So Adolfo was working with a neon artist down in Havana by the name of Kadir Lopez. And I wanted, as we get started tonight, for Adolfo to tell you a little bit about how he began to work with Kadir and how that all got started. And we're going to take a lot of look at some of Kadir's work. And I wasn't able to get Adolfo on live tonight, but I do have a brief conversation that I had with him. So please turn up your volume a little bit. This video that's going to be on, it may be a little hard to hear, but I hope that the sound is okay. Okay, everybody, I'm very pleased to have Adolfo Nodal here with me to join us and give us a little bit more information about some of the neon history in Havana. I met Al when I first went to Cuba, but I didn't realize that he was the neon maven of Havana. And the minute we laid eyes on each other, we became the closest of friends. And we've traveled down there together many, many times. We've had many events in LA together and even in New York. And Al's a great guy. And so Al, tell us a little bit about your neon history and what you've done in LA and in Havana as well.
Thank you, Josh. I'll make it quick. I'm a neon nut. I came to neon through historic preservation. As part of my job in LA, I was responsible for historic preservation in the city, and I came to realize that LA is one of those places that is all about the future. Everything's built for 20 years, and really that we needed something really interesting that would turn Angelinos into historians and into historic preservation. Because I was sick of standing in front of bulldozers to save buildings. I lived around MacArthur Park, an area that has a lot of neon signs, dead neon signs around it. And I started reading Raymond Chandler. And Raymond Chandler had a couple of passages in a couple of his books about the neon signs in LA. And so I hit on this idea that if we could turn these signs on, we could really bring history back in a beautiful way. So we started a windshield survey. And identified like 450 signs, but most of them were just sitting on top of buildings because it was easier to just keep them up there than to take them down. And over a 20-year period, we restored 185 of them. This buzz started to happen in LA about how cool neon was and how cool the history of these neighborhoods were. And it was a really wonderful tool to bring back a sense of history. Since then, I've done a couple of other projects. My last project in LA, which I hope will be my last project in LA soon, was a project a neon rainbow that I created in downtown LA during the pandemic.
So tell us a little bit about how that translated into you doing this type of work in Havana, which has been amazing.
Through this process, I'm Cuban American, and I decided to start getting back into Cuba about 25 years ago. And I have a very close friend, Kadir Lopez, who's a very interesting and dynamic artist in Havana, who's been painting these signs over the years. So, in talking, we decided to develop a public practice for him to move his artwork onto the street. And we started a project called Havana Light in 2014. Started restoring signs. So his first project was to relight 10 theater signs around Havana. And that just revolutionized the situation in Cuba in a different way. People started saying, wow, look at these signs. We're living around them. We forgot all about them. The government just closed out that chapter, and we want it back. So slowly but surely, we established a studio. From 2014 to 2019, we restored we created new and we restored about 60 signs and created another 40 signs for small business owners. And I think we've done what we set out to do, which is to bring back the history of neon to Havana.
It's really been amazing. I mean, one of the favorites that I've always loved down there was the Lafayette Bar sign, and it hangs over Aguiar Street. It's a small street with a big sign and a big presence, and of course it's magnificent. And the funny part was having seen it before it was restored, and then being so excited for you and Let There Be Neon to collaborate and get that sign back up and shining. Tell the funny story about what happened.
Well, the cool thing about the project in Havana, unlike LA, was that it's all neighborhood based. I mean, basically, we didn't ask anybody to do this. I mean, we just basically did it, and we just went to each neighborhood and saw a sign and just spoke to the neighbors around the sign. That sign itself had been sitting idle for over 40 years, and it had a one of those big giant transformers that was hanging off of it.
Right.
Off of the bottom of it for about 30 years.
Right.
And thankfully it didn't fall down on somebody because they weigh like a ton,
Right.
So when we turned it on, everybody was just so happy to have some light, some beauty right in their neighborhood. And the commitment of these people around these signs is amazing. During Hurricane Irma, the sign was really threatened, and some neighbors took it upon themselves to take it down, put it away, and put it back up after Irma. So that shows ownership. And that shows involvement. And
absolutely amazing.
These are subtle things, that not so subtle, but these are things that are important in terms of gauging the commitment of the Cuban people towards this project and their support of it.
Well, we're looking forward to getting our next trip on the books and getting down there. And it's great that you've had a chance to spend some time with us this afternoon. And thank you for your insights. And can't wait to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so that's a word from Adolfo, who's really an amazing guy and a great resource in Havana. And we're going to get back to that Lafayette sign in just a little bit. Remember that story he told about the transformer when we come back to it. But as Adolfo mentioned, Kadir Lopez is a brilliant artist, and I call him the brightest neon light in Havana. And I think he has what I believe to be the only neon fabrication shop in all of Havana, other than what might be owned by the government or operated by the government. He's traveling right now, so he couldn't join us tonight, but here he is, and there's a little view on the right of what his shop looks like. And you're going to hear a lot of what he's mentioned, a lot of him being mentioned tonight, so I just wanted you to get a look at him. And Kadir's brilliant idea was to find neglected and abandoned neon all around Havana and restore it. And in addition to restoring the neon, he turns these little relics into art pieces. And so this one now that you're seeing is the Hotel Nueva Isla, and it's a fantastic sign. And it was junked in the abandoned hotel, lying in ruins in the abandoned Hotel Nueva Isla. There was actually a brilliant 2014 Cuban film called Hotel Nueva Isla, and it tells the story of this once luxurious hotel through the eyes of a caretaker who has actually lived inside this building for decades. And when these buildings in Havana decay, wet, it's hot, humid, they really, really decay. So it's a lot of work to bring something like this back, and just being able to find this thing in the basement of the hotel was absolutely amazing. Suffice it to say, the restaurant that's referenced there on the 7th floor is no longer open. I didn't get a chance to get into the Hotel Nueva Isla, but to illustrate just how bad the condition of some of these buildings that can be, I wanted to show you something similar. This is the Teatro Capitolio. This is a 1923 theater. You can look very closely at the very top. Let me see if I have my handy laser pointer. Yeah, I don't know if you can see up there, but it says Teatro Capitolio up at the top there. And it also says Campo Amor over here. It was known as the Teatro Capitolio when it first opened, and eventually became the Campo Amor. This was an 1,100 seat theater. It was built as a premier first run silent movie palace, basically. And it was located right across the street from Havana's Capitol building, which is modeled after the US Capitol building. They actually hosted in this theater in 1928, the Cuban premiere of Al Jolson's Jazz Singer. But today, as you can see, all that really remains of this theater building is the facade. You can actually see, if you look up at the top floor, that there's some roof coming through. It's a hollow shell. Most of the roof is missing. But when you're lucky enough to explore Havana with Adolfo and you get a chance to walk around with just him, you never know what's going to happen. And I couldn't believe it when he actually started pounding on the door of this hotel, and I'm standing there looking at him like he was crazy. And he said, "Don't worry, I know the guy, I know the guy." And he kept pounding and pounding and pounding, and 5 long minutes went by, and that door cracked open. And I couldn't believe what we saw inside. This is the inside. This is the theater. You can see the balcony above and the main floor below. There's a lot of vegetation growing from the balcony. The elements have really taken over inside this building. And actually living inside this building is this guy, Reynaldo. He's the caretaker. He's the descendant of the family that ran the theater when it was last operating, and he's lived in this place most of his life. His quarters that we were in the back of the theater really are nothing more than 4 cement walls, basically, and a small cot. But he proudly showed us photos of what the theater looked like in the glory days. This photograph he had on the wall shows the original signage, the original pre-neon Capitolio signage on the building. It's absolutely phenomenal, but now not so much. This is a couple of views of the interior, looking towards the screen, and then the side view with the stairs up to the balcony level. It's really amazing. And just a short walk away from the ruins of the Capitolio, the Campo Amor, is a bustling commercial street, commercial district with all kinds of shops and stores, and it's called Boulevard San Rafael and Galeano Street are the 2 major streets that run through there. And of course, to Americans, the most alluring story of survival in Havana is the cars. And everybody knows that Havana is famous for all these amazingly well-preserved American vintage cars. And they're really absolutely everywhere. I thought I'd see a few of them around, but they are just absolutely everywhere. And there's thousands of them on the streets. And this all really stems from the post-revolutionary embargo of commercial trade, right? After they weren't building their own cars in Cuba, and after the embargo, there was no more US cars coming in. And whoops, sorry about that. We'll get to that one in a minute. Some statistics just on the cars. In 1956, according to some stats that I read, there was 143,000 American cars registered in Cuba. And because they weren't actually building or producing cars, and there was nothing coming in after that, except for a few Russian imports, Chinese imports, and things like that. But today, over 60 years later, there's still nearly 70,000 of those registered cars from 1956 that are still on the road. Some people refer to them as Yank tanks. Some people call them taxi Americanos. They're a very valuable asset to any Cuban that has one, especially if they're in good condition, because they can use them to taxi American tourists or Canadian tourists around. It's an entrepreneurial way for them to make a good living. And they have to keep these cars maintained somehow, and the Cubans are masters at the art of maintaining these cars, even without having access to any kinds of part supplies. They keep them looking great, and they keep them riding great. And that kind of brings us to an important point. In the years after the revolution, without spare parts, metal, electrical wiring, things like that became so scarce that people became very resourceful. And if you needed wires or metal or plastic, and there was an old sign hanging off the building next door to you, you took that sign down and recycled the metal to fix your car, use the plastic, use the wires for whatever you needed for. So that was the fate of really many, many, many untold numbers of the great neon signs of Havana before the revolution. And now here in the United States, we know that real estate development and wrecking balls, corporate rebranding, and things of that nature are what brought down a lot of the neon signage and great mid-century signage that we have had all over the United States. But in Cuba, it wasn't redevelopment, it wasn't renovations, it was just absolute sheer necessity or decay, unfortunately. And the cars were fascinating, but I was really there for the signs. And every time I went to go take a picture of any kind of a great sign, it seemed like there was some great car coming along. And so you just stand there for 20 minutes or so, and cars and cars and cars will keep coming by. So you're going to see them in a lot of my photographs. They're everywhere you look. And actually getting a great car into a great sign shot became a real fun part of the whole thing. So this is on the corner of San Rafael and a street called Industria. It's just a stone's throw away from where we saw Reynaldo at the Capitolio. And this is a real remnant of pre-revolutionary commerce in Havana. It's a beautiful tile mosaic frontage that remains on this former appliance showroom. The appliances are long gone. There's no more appliances in there. And if you look closely at the Philips and the Hot Point and the little logo to the left of it, you can see that there is neon tubes that are there. And those neon tubes were being lit at this point in time in 2017. They were new. On a prior trip, they hadn't been there. And when I had come back just 3 weeks later, they were gone, which was interesting. So I know Kadir and Adolfo were up to something, but I still don't know what. And I'm kind of wondering what it's going to look like the next time I get down there. But as long as that tile mosaic is preserved, we'll be very happy. And speaking of things that changed, this is the Edificio Palomo. It's an absolutely beautiful facade. And it reminds me in a lot of ways of some of the dingbats that you see in Los Angeles, those fun mid-century buildings with great names and great logos. This is the Palomo building in Centro Havana, which is a very tight, crowded, bustling area right in the center of town. And the ground level retail seemed to be closed on this particular day, but clearly you can see that the apartments were occupied upstairs. Some people on the terrace giving me a look to see exactly what I was doing. And I'm going to confess, in this photograph, the car that you see here was my driver, who's a friend of mine. His name's Amadeo. He is right out of Central Casting with that beautiful 1950 Chevy. He's a great, great guy. And there was this moment in the middle of the decade in 2015-16, before Obama came to Cuba, this photograph was taken. And by 2016, when I went back with the Sign Collective and Signs United group, I want to shout out to some of my Sign Collective and Signs United people, Will, Steve, I think Marla's here, Stephanie, Maud, Betty, I saw Kim, Cliff, maybe. We had this great trip in 2016. And by that point in time, Obama had been there, the Rolling Stones had been there. There was a real sense of optimism. The streets had become paved, well paved, things were being fixed. JetBlue was getting ready to start flying American flights from the United States on a regular basis. It seemed to us every kid in Havana had a smartphone, and there was Wi-Fi hubs popping up all over the city. And it was a really extraordinary time to be there. In 2017, the optimism dampened a little bit. The Trump administration reinstated a lot of restrictions on American travel, and it sort of felt like a bubble being popped. And I had visited about 3 times in 2017. In May, just before those restrictions came, November, I had gone down there with a group of lawyers and judges from New York. And that was among the first of the groups to go after the restrictions came into place. And that became a very challenging trip. And you could just feel a sense of optimism had deflated from the whole city. And I did go back in December with the Preservation Hall Jazz Band, where they premiered their documentary film called A Tuba to Cuba, which was based upon the first trip that we did in 2015. And by that time, a good sense of the optimism had returned. The regulations didn't seem to be as onerous as once thought. People were still able to go down there. The JetBlue flights were continuing to operate. And we had a great fun trip for a big international art festival. I know Dina, I think, is here, maybe Giannis, Melly, I'm not sure who from that trip. But we had a great time. And then shortly after that, we had another trip planned and the pandemic came along. And so that has really changed things dramatically. There was a travel restriction for a long time. I haven't been able to be back there since, but I think we do have another trip that's getting ready to come onto the books for maybe next spring. And if anybody's ever interested in doing that, please feel free to let me know. All right. Now, meeting Adolfo on that first trip was a fateful and coincidental thing. It was surprising to me that I would find somebody that was that would be able to show me so much of the great neon and buildings and things that I was really interested in seeing. And so that was a fortuitous meet. But another fortuitous meet, another great thing to happen to us was meeting Gretel Sintis, who is, she was randomly assigned to us as our tour guide on that great 2016 trip where we went down there with the Sign group. And when I met her and she asked me what our group was really there to see, I said, neon, we want to see neon. And she didn't really quite get it. But I showed her a few photos from my prior trips and she instantly understood exactly what I meant and she fell in love with it. And she has become one of she's become one of us, really. She's become an expert and an authority on Havana's neon signage. I wanted Gretel to be able to join us tonight live, but she's traveling with a tour group in Havana and Zoom is still blocked in Cuba, so we couldn't get her on this feed. But I did get her on a WhatsApp video, and she's live on the scene around Havana. Now the sound is not ideal for this, so turn it up a bit and try your best to follow along and meet our wonderful Gretel. And here we are, Gretel. Hello, it's great to see you.
Hello, how are you?
It's
great to see you too.
we've got Gretel here. She's we're videoing quote unquote live from Havana, and I see it's a little bit of a windy day, but it looks beautiful there, and you're surprising me in front of one of my favorites.
I know, it's one of my favorites too. A great sign, and I'm so lucky to have this view. Look at this, what I found. This balcony right in the middle of Galliano Street. Perfect.
That's very clever. It doesn't surprise me that you found the greatest place to see that from. And of course, the next time I come down to Havana, you must take me there. But I want you to say a quick hello, introduce yourself a little bit to our audience, and tell us a little bit about where you are and what we're looking at.
Okay, Josh. My name is Gretel, and hi, everybody. I'm a tour guide in Havana, and I'm standing right now on Galliano Street in this balcony that I found with a great view. And this sign behind me is Fin de Siglo department store. It's one of the most amazing signs in all Havana, actually Central Havana neighborhood. This place was founded in 1897, and it had 5 floors, escalators, elevators, air conditioning in all the 5 floors, and many departments. Let's move a little bit so you can see it better, and you can see the street too. Look at this beautiful font. So as I was telling you, it had different departments where they sold shoes, clothing, jewelry. They also had fur, hardware. So it was a really big place with 3 entrances located in one of the most popular streets of Havana on Galliano, and very near many other commercial streets. Here we're seeing a little bit of the street. It's kind of noisy, but I hope you can get a full, view. Beautiful font. Look at this sign, how fancy it is, and so big. So it's really amazing, and one of my favorites too.
It's so absolutely mid-century, modern, and beautiful. And it's so interesting for me to see it because it's been quite a while, as you know, since I've been down there. They've restored the facade a little bit. There was some windows running down the middle that they seem to have taken out. And I know that our friends Kadir and Adolfo have done some work with Let There Be Neon to fix that sign.
Yes.
And it's looking beautiful. What does Fin de Siglo mean? And tell us a little bit about Galliano Street in general. Just a little bit about this street there that you're on.
Fin de Siglo means end of the century. The end of the century. So, and it was actually when it was made, when it was first built, 1897.
But we know that the sign itself probably came sometime in the 1950s when they did this renovation of the building, which looks absolutely beautiful.
And just to tell you a little bit about the street, if you can hear me, because it's very noisy, look how busy this street is. And then some of the buildings next to the Siglo, like that one over there, is called Palacio de las Novias. So there used to be many neon signs around here.
Is that the Palace of the Brides?
Yes, the Palace of the Brides. I'm sorry, I say it in Spanish and I don't translate. Forget that I need to translate. But anyway, it's a street full of stores and markets and little vendors everywhere. It's very popular and busy all the time, every day here in Central Havana. So very commercial. That's the character of this street.
Well, it's so great of you to take us here to see this, and it's really great to get a glimpse of it live, seeing some of those American cars going by. And you look great, and thanks so much for joining us, and maybe we'll see you again.
Thank you. You too. Of course, I have more to show you later.
Okay, great.
Bye-bye.
I created a monster, didn't I? She's the best. And Fin de Siglo is absolutely spectacular. I think it looked a little bit better before they repainted the front, but it's an absolutely spectacular mid-century relic. Unfortunately, the store itself, the glamour is faded, but it's still there and it's looking great in this photo from 2016. And then I just wanted to show you a better shot of the Palacio de las Novias, which is the Palace of the Brides. It was a very elegant bridal salon in the middle of Havana. And then another shop front on Galliano, La Internacional, which was the California store originally. The California store, it was all American goods, but they changed the name after the revolution to La Internacional. And it was still operating as a store where Cubans who were traveling internationally could shop and buy finer things so that when they traveled internationally, they would look much more presentable to the world. We're going to go back to Gretel. Those survivors that I showed you give you a sense of what the entire area looked like, but I want Gretel to take us to another gem that she's got for us, and it's one that we've heard about a little bit before. So here we go with Gretel again.
Hola, Gretel. Thanks for coming back. And I see that you're somewhere else right now, and I'm trying to figure out where you are. So let's get a good look around and tell us where you're at.
Hi, Josh. I'm so glad to be back here. And yes, I wanted to show you now this amazing sign, which is also one of my favorite ones.
There
and
you
I know
go.
that is one of your favorites too. This one is the Lafayette Restaurant. And it's an amazing big sign full of colors. We have good light now, so this is perfect here. The Lafayette Restaurant was part of the hotel of the same name, which was built in the 1930s. This building here on my left. And the Lafayette Hotel was also a very popular place in old Havana. The bar of the hotel was very popular among the mob that used to come here during the 40s and 50s. And the restaurant, well, the restaurant has been empty for a long time, and it's been closed, but we can still find the door of the club and this font, this writing here, Restaurant Lafayette, and when it opens, and also the iron of the handle, which says Club Lafayette, very light here, but it's an amazing find and discovery that I just found today.
Oh, wow. That's great.
And let's look at the sign again.
The sign is great.
Okay, the sun is out, and I also wanted to show you, let's go underneath the sign so we can see two stickers over there, which read Havana Light, and it has a phone number. And on the other side, there's a round sticker with buildings from New York that reads, Let There Be Neon. So this is all thanks to the project of Kadir and Adolfo, who have been restoring signs in Havana since, actually this one since 2017. So thanks to the amazing work they do here in Havana.
Well,
That's it.
This is one of my favorites for sure. It's one of my bucket listers, generally one of the first ones we go see when we come down there. And it's just amazing how it hangs so big and looming over that beautiful Calle Aguilar in Old Havana.
That's right, yes.
So thank you so much for taking me to see one of my favorites. And I have some other good stories. I have some other good stories I'll share with everybody about this great sign. And it's great to see you. Thank you so much, Gretel. Enjoy that beautiful day.
Great to see you.
Okay.
Hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, well, I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to start to move this along. But this Lafayette sign, this is what it looked like in 2015 before it was restored. And you can see on the bottom under the air conditioning sign, that's the transformer that was sort of dangling out the bottom that Adolfo was talking about, hanging there for years and windstorms and whatever else. And it's a miracle that it didn't come down. It's an absolutely beautiful sign. And here it is looking much better after the restoration. No more rust and no more crust. It's looking really good. And when you stand around to shoot this thing for a long time, eventually some absolutely gorgeous car comes along and you get a great shot. And it's a really, really beautiful. In fact, one day when I was shooting it, I was actually invited up to somebody's apartment up on the second floor. She had seen me out there and she'd seen me talking to some Cuban friends of mine down on the street, and she invited me up into her apartment to take a shot of it from this great perspective and see it from above, which was really a lot of fun. And then just a quick shot of it all lit up, looking great at night after decades and decades of being dark, looking beautiful, lighting up this beautiful street. And this never could have been done without a lot of help. Adolfo and Kadir were supported in this project, as Gretel mentioned, by Let There Be Neon, which is the great legacy neon shop in New York. They sent supplies, transformers, glass, you name it, whatever they have. Jeff Friedman, who runs Let There Be Neon, was very generous in getting all these signs lit up. And so I wanted you to just get a chance to meet Jeff real quick and hear how he got started. So again, I'm sorry about the video quality here, but we'll do the best we can.
Oops. Hello?
Hi, you can mute yourself real quick.
Jeff, tell me a little bit about yourself, your business, and how it was that you decided to get involved with neon restoration in Havana.
Right. So Let There Be Neon was founded in 1972. We do all kinds of work, custom work, contemporary artwork, film and TV, props, private commission pieces for the home, restaurants. But, you know, the true heart and soul of what we love to do is restoration work, because we love the history behind neon. Neon has such great history. And a number of years ago, I was down on a private trip that was based on music. I went with a lot of musicians and writers to Havana. It was my first time in Cuba. The focus was on music, but I knew, like I try to do in every unusual locale or someplace I've been for the first time, is to try to seek out if there's any neon people. And knowing the history of neon in Cuba and Havana, especially in the 50s and 60s, I said there has to be neon people here. Well, to make a long story short, we were unsuccessful until the very last day of our trip. We finally found Kadir Lopez.
Sure.
And we immediately hit it off. We've become lifelong friends, of course. And they introduced me to the fact that they were restoring or getting ready to restore all these historic signs in Havana and around Cuba that they were finding discarded, whether they were still at a location and not turned on for 40, 50 years, or in a junkyard somewhere, or being used as somebody's coffee table somewhere. I mean, as Cuba goes, right? Everything is up for grabs. And seeing that they were just beginning their restoration work at that time, I immediately wanted to be involved, and our friendship developed, and we helped what then became Havana Light with Adolfo, and that's the history of it.
So Jeff's shop is busy. There's a lot of noise back there, but it's great to get a chance to see inside there. And you can see that Norge sign that's behind him. Kadir found a bunch of those Norge signs down in Havana and restored them in his signature style with paint on the back and relit the neon. And we know Norge from the Norge balls, but that was a huge European appliance company. And those signs were all over down in Cuba. And I want to get to, I have a few minutes left here. I want to get to the cinema culture down in Havana and show you some of these beautiful cinemas that we found all over the city. The cinemas in Havana were absolutely amazing. Havana was probably one of the great cinema cities of the world back in the 50s. I think there were more cinemas in Havana than there were in New York City or in Paris at the time. And some of them were constructed and operated by major operators like 20th Century Fox and Warner Brothers. And all of the cinemas that you're going to see, every cinema in Havana was built before the revolution. None have been built since. And many that survived are just absolute gems, like the Teatro Maya that I showed you earlier, where we had the concert, relit the sign. And then, of course, this icon in Old Havana, the Cine Cuba, a white granite facade. It's an oldie colonial style. You can actually see up at the top, it says colonial inset in there. The neon sign was a 1950s edition when they turned this into a cinema as opposed to being a theater. And this theater, unfortunately, was abandoned for decades, and it's used now as some kind of a laboratory space. The inside is not a theater, but they've left the sign out there, and it's sort of iconic and beautiful, and it's a great thing to see. I'm going to go through these quickly because I am kind of running out of time a little bit. But one of the other funny coincidences that happened is as I'm standing there shooting this cinema, this guy happens along with this manuscript that he's writing about documenting the cinemas in Havana. And it was just pure coincidence that I ended up meeting him. And unfortunately, there's no photocopiers or ways for me to get a copy of this thing. And he didn't have an email address, and I was unable to, continue to talking to him for more than a few minutes. And into the night he went, and hopefully one day I'll actually see that manuscript somewhere. Just amazing coincidence to see him there. This is the Karl Marx Theater, a very imposing 5,500 seat theater that was before the revolution called the Blanquita, and Fidel Castro renamed it in honor of his hero, the socialist philosopher and revolutionary Karl Marx. This still remains operating as a live performance and movie venue in Havana. And it's a very symbolic facade of the revolution. Those little things are called Coco taxis. They have them all over town. They really don't get better than the Cine Lido, which is in the Mariano neighborhood of Havana. It's far off the beaten path, and we hunted this one down, and it really never disappoints. It looks like a Mondrian painting, but if you look very closely at the facade, you can see that they're actually mosaic tiles, small mosaic tiles. You can see where some of them have fallen off on some parts of the facade. But this theater is still in mostly pretty good condition, showing films, operating, and it's absolutely amazing. Then we've got one of my favorites, the Cine Cosmos, which is just an absolutely facade, a 600-seat theater in the neighborhood called Playa, which is pretty far to the west of Havana. This one's been closed for many years. It's not operating as a theater at all anymore. It's, I think, a school at this point in time, but look at those amazing Sputniks and little things on there. And of course, the Cine font, the small Cine neon font on there that was common on a lot of the cinemas back then. They're adorable. This is the Arenal, which is a 1945 Art Deco cinema that's in the Playa neighborhood, not too far from the Lido, and that's one of the Russian import cars that you see there. And a lovely young lady under an umbrella protecting herself from the Havana sun, and you can see a small neon sign over the front of the theater, added in the 1950s. These two are great. Cine Alba is in a pretty remote neighborhood in the south of the city. It's been closed for many years, and I think they use it as a gym or a dance studio now. But that rounded Art Deco facade is just absolutely amazing. The neon sign is still hanging on the building. There was a little Cine that you can see just above the A in Alba, but they removed that. And then in Mariano, another neighborhood, a working neighborhood in Havana, off the tourist grid is this Cine Record, which was, it's also been closed for many years, but reportedly intact inside. I wasn't able to get in there. There's an artist who's using that for his private use. One day, hopefully I'll get in there. Those breeze blocks are absolutely amazing on that one. And then one of my favorites is the 1,200-seat Cine Florida, which is in another remote kind of neighborhood called Diez de Octubre down in Havana. It's a 1949 Art Deco magnificent theater. It's been closed for a long time. And on the right, you can see one of Kadir's paintings. It's a mixed media painting with actual neon mounted on a painting of the facade of the theater. Pretty cool piece of art. Cine El Megano is absolutely one of my favorites, right in the center of town by the Capitolio. It's a pre-revolution theater. It was the Cine Capri when it first opened. They showed movies there for until about 10 years ago, and it's now on this photo on the left. There was a live band performing inside, so everybody's kind of looking in through the windows to see what was going on. Pretty cool. Havana Light lit that Cine El Megano sign up, and it gives it that corner a real neon noir appearance. It's really beautiful. And then just around the corner is the Cine Rex, the Rex Duplex. I have a lot of stories to tell about it, but I'm running out of time. Look at that beautiful minty green vitrolite clock and frontage on the left. And then inside, of course, it's open air. So they're not showing movies at the Rex Duplex anymore, but it's a beautiful looking building. And then the Cine La Rampa, which is right near the Havana Hilton that we started out with. It shares the frontage with what's called the Milan Pizzeria. It's great pizza in Havana, and people often call this the Milan Theater because of the way it looks on the front, but you can see on the side that amazing La Rampa graphic. And this area was such a popular area back in the day, and it's still popular, like I said before, because it's a Wi-Fi hotspot on this street now, and it's really a lively corner. And going further down La Rampa, which is 23rd Avenue, on Havana Street Grid, if you take it down to 12th Street, you find the suitably named Cine 23E12. It's a 1952 beautiful Art Deco, very simplistic, but really eye-capturing facade. And this one is still very active. There's many film festivals, film clubs that use the theater, and still an operating concern. And just up the block from that, you got the red and the blue is the amazing Cine Riviera on 23rd Avenue as well. Very popular theater with university students who are nearby, and they're still showing movies at this theater. And that signage is just absolutely amazing, absolutely amazing. Still on 23rd is the Cine Yara from the 1940s, which originally opened as the Radio Centro, the Warner Radio Centro, and it's 1,600 seat theater. It's the premier movie house in Havana, still to this day. You can see on the left that picture. I'm not sure if the little Zoom screens are blocking it, but there's a little Cinerama sign hanging on the facade of the Yara from the photo that I grabbed from Cinema Treasures. This film, in 2015, this theater became one of the first to have digital projection in Havana, but they also kept their 35 millimeter projection screens. So if Quentin Tarantino was listening, he'd be very happy to know he can go screen some classic films down there. Charlie Chaplin, another great gem from 23rd Avenue. And you can see this was a really significant thoroughfare in Havana, all these theaters and restaurants and nightclubs. The Sala Avenida used to be the Cine Avenida. It's now a dance, music performance studio. And just take a look at the Art Deco facade and look at the ticket window just by the front of that beautiful Chevy. It's great googie shaped window, really neat to see.
Hi, Josh.
Yes.
Josh, if you were a little over time, if you can wrap it up fairly quickly.
Okay, I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to have about 3 more minutes if you can give it to me.
Yeah, 3 more is fine.
Perfect. All right. So this is the Cine Atlas, which is a very far, long trip out of the city, but worth the ride. An unbelievable facade, an unbelievable sign that hangs off that building with that font. It's just incredible. The inside not looking too great, but the lobby and the staircase still retaining a lot of the great Art Deco splendor that it had. This is the 1949 Cine Los Angeles making an appearance. There's 2 neon signs on the front of this. You can see one up here and one over here. And by the time I got to this theater, it was operating as a video rental store. They weren't showing actual movies anymore. Not to be confused with the Apollo in Harlem. We only got 1 L in this Apollo, but this theater is still operating far south of the city. And then the amazing Cine Los Pinos. You can get another look at one of those great little Cine neons. This is pretty far in Barrio Los Pinos, very far off the tourist grid, but even Gretel was wondering what the hell I was doing going down there. But this was a great, great cinema, just a beautiful place. Acapulco, one of the luxury cinemas from the 1950s. Cine Metropolitan with absolutely amazing signage, just beautiful. And then I'm going to wrap up with one of my all-time favorites, which is the Cine Teatro America, which is just a beautiful Art Deco masterpiece, really. The exterior is very simple and clean, and it's a 11-story building with offices and things upstairs, but the theater itself is on Galeano Street, just a couple of blocks from Fin de Siglo that Gretel showed us before. Inside is a 1,700 seat auditorium, an absolutely beautiful condition. They use it for a lot of live performances now. Original furnishings all throughout the theater, reception desk, and all this Art Deco, amazing, amazing pieces, including this fantastic terrazzo map of the Americas. This was Teatro America after all. Remember, America is not only the United States, America is North and South America. So America wasn't necessarily a bad word in Havana. And this one managed to survive for all these years, looking absolutely beautiful. In 2017, when I went, I almost had a heart attack because the sign was gone and I was devastated. But guess what? 2019, it was back. All those little bulbs relit, everything lighted up at night now, and it looked absolutely beautiful. So Havana cinemas are really a time capsule. They're survivors of a bygone era. Like I said, in New York, cinemas disappeared because of multiplexes or corporate rebranding or sold to a developer, but not in Havana, where they managed to survive, thank God. And politics aside, there's a lot of potential for Havana. The people that you meet there are warm, welcoming, and with an economic turnaround that may come hopefully at some point in time, we hope that by shining the light on some of these great places that managed to survive, that people will want to be able to save them. So thanks for letting me show them to you. I really appreciate it. It's always amazing how fast an hour goes by, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Josh. That was absolutely amazing. I've been to Cuba, I guess 3 or 4 times myself, and to Havana 3 or 4 times, but I've never seen any of this. You got to go with a guy who knows what he's doing.
Come with me the next time we go. Happy to take you.
Oh, I would love to go. And as a Canadian, it's a little easier for me as well. But I will say that the one thing I did see when I was there, that Havana is also very blessed with beautiful apron art. In other words, what some people call apron or apron signs. So they not only have the beautiful neon in the commercial districts, but underfoot, when you're entering what used to be American shops or international shops, you see just unbelievably good mosaic and terrazzo signs that are welcoming you into the store. And I actually featured some of them in my presentation when I did that one on apron signs a couple of months ago. I guess also Havana would be a good example of preservation by neglect. Almost the whole city is preservation by neglect. And although it's, you know, in terrible shape, the signs persist, which is amazing.
Yeah,
really good. Now we do have a couple of questions from the viewers tonight. Nancy, are you still on the line, Nancy?
I am. Hey,
you had a couple of questions, Nancy.
Yeah, thank you, Josh, for sharing your knowledge with us. I was curious though, the two hotels you started out with, is that foreign money that's maintaining those hotels so well?
Well, let's not call it so well. They're maintained, but yes, it's foreign money. I think that the Havana Libre is operated by the TRIP organization, TRYP, which is a European chain. And most of the larger hotels in Havana are owned by the government, but operated by European chains.
Right. Okay. And then the all the neon restoration, are these fabulous people you introduced us to self-funding this, or are they nonprofits, or how is this being paid for, the work?
It's a great question. So, you know, Kadir is a commercial artist, and commercial artists in Cuba are revered, and they are the pride of the country, and they are able to, you know, sell their works and make money internationally and such. Adolfo operates a tour business, and so he's able to bring people there and raise money in that regard. Preservation Hall Foundation donated substantial amount of money to restore the Maya sign. And Jeff in New York, Jeff Friedman at Let There Be Neon, he's really been amazing in providing resources for the project. So there's various ways that they fund, but mostly private and fundraising.
Thanks.
Okay. We've had two comments. You'll see all the comments when I send them to you. Both of them are saying that this was the very best presentation they've ever seen on the SCA Zoom series. And as a former presenter myself, I'm quite hurt by this, but that's okay. You know, somebody's got to be the best, right? I will say also, you've set the bar very, very high in that you had video in your presentation. I've never had that before. So now our next presenters have got something to beat.
Very nervous.
Dean Milano asks, can I tell a quick story about my trip there? Dean, if you're online still, can you come on and tell your story?
Yeah, and can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Fine.
Okay, and again, I'll try to make this quick, but when we were there in 2001, my wife and I stayed at the Hilton, Havana, which was incredible. I didn't see some of the lobby pictures were just beautiful. I mean, it is fabulous there. And I was able to wander all over Havana because we went there on our own through Canada. We didn't have to worry about being a group and monitored by anybody. So we wandered around. One day there was a 4-piece Cuban band playing, and I play stand-up bass for a living. So I said, could I sit in with you guys? And they let me sit in. I played stand-up bass with them on a bunch of songs. We had a great time. When I was done, I said to the bass player, I handed him his bass back. I said, you know, your strings are all unraveling. You need new bass strings here. He said, are you kidding? We can't get bass strings here in Cuba. We're using fishing line for our strings. And oh my God, I said, give me your address. So he gave me his address. I sent him a brand new set of stand-up bass strings down to his home in Havana. And I got a letter back from him that came right to me here in Chicago from Havana, thanking me like crazy. He just couldn't believe that he got the strings from me. He wanted to come back. His whole family wanted to meet me and everything else.
Oh, that's so
it
great.
was quite an experience. Yeah, it was just absolutely wonderful.
That's
yeah, the whole
fantastic.
trip. And I'm a car nut, so I sat in the Malecon down there by the ocean watching those cars go by. I just couldn't believe it. Every make, Kaiser, Edsel, Packard, Hudson, all of them are still down there as daily drivers. And if you go to the Capitol, which was modeled after our United States Capitol building, all the old cabs line up in front of the Capitol building right there. And that's when you get the taxis. You can drive in the old cars there.
They're beautiful. When we went down with Preservation Hall Jazz Band, we on both of those trips, we brought substantial amounts of musical equipment and supplies to give out. And it was really one of the most rewarding experiences to give these young musicians who, they're so talented down there, and they don't have the supplies that we have here. And so that was really amazing. Thanks for that great insight. Appreciate that.
All right.
Yeah, that's a great story, Dean. Kim also says Catter has had art shows in the US as well. Do you know anything about that?
What's the first word there, Brian? I didn't hear the first part.
Kim Rosenberg comments that Catter has had art shows in the US as well.
Yes, Kadir's had many shows. I just went to one of his openings in New York City last week. He did this neon series of islands, neon shapes, and a variety of different islands, the shape of many different islands. It was a great show on the Upper West Side. Yeah, Kadir does get to travel a lot to internationally to exhibit art, and that's part of the pride and joy of the country. He's a terrific guy. I think some of us went to a show of his in Los Angeles at one point in time, and he's great. And of course, Kim was with us on the 2016 trip where we visited Kadir's house down in Havana.
Wow, that's great. Okay, well, is there any other questions or comments anybody would like to ask Josh? You can just kind of throw it open now. We're starting to lose our people. I will say, Josh, we had our 88 participants at the height, which is very good for an SCA presentation. And we already know that there will be many, many more people that will watch the show later as a recording. Oh, here's something from Kim Rossi. The question is there a carousel of time there? I'm not sure what that means.
There's not a carousel of time. There is a carousel of progress.
Oh, what does that mean, carousel of progress?
It's just an interesting Art Deco structure that's down in Havana.
Oh, okay.
I don't have a picture of it, unfortunately.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to make a few closing comments here. Again, thank you, Josh, for an absolutely excellent and entrancing presentation. I think that you'll have lots of people clamoring to get on your next trip. So maybe you'll have to run a couple of them.
Maybe. I hope so.
Yeah. I'd just like to remind everybody again about next month when SCA member Alan Hess will be speaking about his newest book, Googie Modern, Architectural Drawings of Armet, Davis, and Newlove, on Wednesday, December the 7th at 8 Eastern, at 7 Central, and 5 p.m. Pacific. SCA members will be receiving the relevant details and registration link by email very shortly. Others can register through the website directly. Thank you again to all our guests that joined us tonight and for spending some time with us. You can expect an email shortly from me inviting you to join the SCA, and then you can enjoy all the benefits of membership, including our monthly Zoom presentations. And we do have the recording will be available probably tomorrow. On that, because of my screw up there, I didn't get the introduction recorded. So I will make a separate recording of the introduction. And then I think our very talented webmasters will be able to splice the two together, because we did get Josh's presentation in entirety. So with those final comments, unless there's anything else anybody would like to say, let me see just if there's anything. Oh, here's one. How can we get in touch with Josh to express interest in a future trip? Oh, there, you've put your email up there, Josh. Okay, thank you. And if somebody doesn't have that email, just send me a quick email and I can forward your message on. Did you want to say anything? Last words, Josh?
No, I really enjoyed showing this to everybody. And of course, you know, I had a lot more, but the hour goes by too fast.
Yes, that's true. Well, the best
Maybe there'll be a part 2 one day.
Yes, absolutely. But even better if we can do it in person down in Cuba. So with that, I'll thank everyone again, and especially Josh for a top-notch presentation. And I will bid all of you a good night, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks, Brian.